This week on To the Contrary.
First, Plan B under fire again. Then, are millennial teens more materialistic than prior generations? Behind the headlines, sexuality and Islam.
Bay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, the Plan B battle continues.
Of all things, the pro-choice Obama administration is challenging a federal court ruling that made emergency contraceptives available to women and girls of all ages. This decision came hours after the Food and Drug Administration approved over-the-counter sales of emergency contraception to females 15 and older. The legal challenge will not stop the FDA decision from taking effect, but it reignites the debate about young women having access to Plan B without the consent of a doctor or parent. Reproductive rights groups, normally supportive of the president, criticize the move as politically motivated.
So, Patricia Sosa, was this a decision based more on politics or health care?
Well, it is a compromise. It's clearly a compromise based both on the politics and on the health data, and probably his personal concern that he doesn't want girls under 15 because they don't have access. So it's both.
Political. The judge found that the health concerns were unfounded, so this is just a purely politically motivated decision.
I think it speaks to a larger conversation that needs to happen around the mental health, that it goes in hand with the FDA-type decisions about physical health. Absolutely, politics is involved, which is, I think, a greater conversation about what we need to be doing in these areas.
You know, honestly, I think that President Obama has 2 young daughters around the same age, and that probably had a lot to do with it. Would he want his daughters to be able to have access to something like Plan B with, without parental consent? And I really do think that probably had a lot to do with his decision.
But, this is also the first president ever to address a Planned Parenthood convention. Doesn't it seem a little schizophrenic that he is largely a pro-choice guy and that he would take this position?
But I don't think the position is so outrageous.
It's not outrageous.
He's allowing over-the-counter access to girls older than 15. He is asking for the court to stay the order because he thinks that the court is intruding into regulatory proceedings. And the only difference really is 3 years between 15 and 12 because the order of the judge is basically older than 12, and they're using the equivalency of condoms. When boys go and buy condoms, you don't ask them how old they are, well, you shouldn't be asking girls. But really, it's a very progressive decision on his part and of the FDA.
I'm going to defend President Obama on this one, and on the Planned Parenthood thing. I know it's shocking, I'm going to defend President Obama, but when he was talking to Planned Parenthood about women having the right to choose, he was not talking about children who are under the age of 15. That is 2 totally separate subjects. We discussed this when I was here a few weeks ago about how vehemently I am against children being able to get this drug, and I still stand by that.
At what age does a girl become a child or a girl become a woman? I mean, is there a marker there that we should be going by?
That is a gray area, but here's what I'll say. We look at other things that you have to have parental consent or you have to be over the age of 18 to get. We're looking at liquor, cigarettes. I still have to go in and show an ID if I want to get decongestion. And so when you look at all those sorts of things and then you say, but girls under the age of 15, children should be able to have access to that, that's where I'm putting the boundary.
What's troubling here is the politicizing of this issue, and absolutely there's politics at play, but Republicans talk about, overreach of government, and, in this situation, you could call it overreach, and Democrats are revolting against the president, but at the same time want to care for our women. So I think what is needed here, in the same way that we do research on driving age and drinking age and all of these kinds of things, is more understanding of the implications that go beyond just the physical impact on a woman, but also the mental health aspect, where education is needed. And we need to be having a broader conversation instead of this politicized 2-year discrepancy.
Okay, but tell me, what aspect of mental health are you getting at here? I mean, to me, if a young woman, girl, child, whatever you want to call her, is old enough to get pregnant, I would think, or possibly be pregnant. Let's remember, PlanB doesn't abort a pregnancy. It just stops a pregnancy from taking place. Then why isn't she old enough to make the decision that I'm too young to have this child?
Well, you could argue that if you can make the decision to be sexually active, you should be able to make the decision to be able to handle and the decisions around that. But I think this speaks again to where sex education is needed, where we need to be more proactive about educating young women about, frankly, the emotional burden that comes with sexual activity at a young age.
Well, and that makes perfect sense, but tell a little bit more about what you're talking about emotionally. What should the emotional survey be that you want to see before you decide whether this is a good move or not?
Well, I think about making and frankly, I think this conversation needs to come in even to the abortion debate and others as well, in terms of, it's not a black and white regulation. We need to look more broadly at these issues of women's health instead of throwing it into this political court of at what age. So I don't know what the clear-cut decision is, but I think that we need to broaden the conversation. We need to broaden the research. Again, looking at the number of single mothers in this concentrated area of 62% of single mothers being the 20 to 24 range, where education is needed for our girls.
I mean, I think if you need the law to draw a line and to help you parent, you have bigger problems at home, quite honestly. This is not an abortifacient. As you said, if there are children who are having sex, we don't want teen mothers. We don't want teen abortions. So this is something that we should be addressing. And the course of the whole election was about the war on women. If Republicans didn't want to pay for others' birth control, he equated that to denying access. And then he turns around and denies access. And that, to me, is a problem.
Denying access to whom? He's not denying access. It's the opposite. He's opening access. Maybe the problem is between the 15 and 12.
Wait a second. Let's roll it back here a minute. The FDA said any woman of any age, any girl of any age, however you want to call it, should have access to this, because there's no health downside for taking what is essentially an overdose of birth control pills. That's what prevents the pregnancy from implanting. So if you're saying that he compromised, that's not a medical compromise, because the scientific panel said it's okay for girls of any age to have access to it.
And Bonnie, I'm not questioning the fact that it's a political compromise. I know it's a political compromise in a very polarized environment. And in some ways, I would say, well, you're compromising, and the only side that you are knowing is your own political base and not the right, because the right is not going to want you to do this anyhow.
But explain for me what the calculus was here on Obama's part, because on the one hand, he's not going to win any conservative votes for the Democratic Party by stopping access at below 15, right?
It is completely inconsistent. I mean, there's no question about it, because there is the FDA countering what he's saying. So the question for me is, who is putting the pressure on them to move the age, and why are they doing it in that way? Because, again, how do we make this a holistic conversation, one that is actually productive, instead of this nitpicking over details that clearly is political in some form?
I don't think it's nitpicking over details. I think there's a huge difference between 17 and 15. I also think there's a huge difference between 15 and 12 or 10 or 11. The argument about them being children, I'm sorry, I really do have to go back to that. You all say that, if they're old enough to be sexually active, they should be old enough to get this. I think, there's a lot of instances in which they may not have chosen to be sexually active, and that's where my concern comes in about them having access to this drug, sweeping it under the rug, and not discussing it with a parent, which is where parental consent comes in.
All right. Let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Urbay or at To the Contrary. From emergency contraception to materialistic millennials?
Today's teenagers are lazier and more materialistic than baby boomers were, that according to a new study. Compared to boomers, millennials place more importance on owning such things as big houses and shiny new cars. Yet they're also the generation least willing to work hard or long hours. Teens may feel this way because the society they grew up in gave them a sense of entitlement. And that may be the fault of the boomer generation.
So, Marjorie Clifton, in this over-materialized, overdeveloped, over-advertised, overpopulated world, you have a young daughter. How are you going to raise her not to be materialistic? How do you fight back against all those influences?
Well, I think as parents, it's challenging. And I think one of the things that we're seeing when we look at data attributed to the different generations is that it very much is indicative of the times, sort of what's happening in the outer atmosphere. And as the parents at this table and soon-to-be parents at this table know, it is very challenging because you sometimes are working counterculture. Now, I'm the oldest of 5 children, and my brother is a millennial, my youngest brother, and I'm Generation X. And I can tell you the disparity between the attitudes, the values, the ways that we act, even raised in the same household in an 8-year difference is completely different. And, you could argue some of, his friends' behaviors and things are a little bit more on the entitled and their values are a little bit different. But you know what? He was raised in a boom time. It was during that, high-tech boom. Businesses were on the rise, whereas I can remember, the crash in the 80s within the oil businesses and when everyone's houses were underwater. So I think that changes the values. Now, as parents, I think it means how do we sort of protect, how do we instill a work ethic? But something millennials are doing to change the 21st century workforce in general is changing the value of work-life balance. And I think they're criticized a lot for that, but frankly, it's something that even the Gen X and boomers can embrace in terms of this need and this value of time with friends.
I have to make a comment about this issue. As a boomer with 2 millennium kids, and the challenges, the technology impact tremendously. What is to press a button and get everything you want? I mean, just like this. So of course you're going to feel entitled. At the same time, they have to work so hard. I see my kids,
competition to get into college is so much worse.
Tremendous. And the expectations academically and in every aspect in terms of competition for these kids is tremendous. At the same time, I'm going to make an observation, something that I'm having a really hard time. My son is 17. I would like my son to work. But you know what? He cannot do a paper route because the adults have it. He cannot work even at McDonald's because the adults have those jobs. So I want my kids to work, and I cannot find an entry-level job for them. So it's a very challenging situation.
Yes, as a millennial, I can definitely say I am a millennial sitting at the table. It's a very challenging situation. The jobs numbers came out today, and for the youth jobless rate, it's an effective rate of 16%. So even those who want to work, it's very difficult for them. But I don't like to call them millennials, by the way. I like to call them the iGen, and not just for iPads, just because it does seem like a me generation. On the flip side of that, though, I don't think this generation is particularly more materialistic than past generations. It's just a different type of materialism. I think if
different type how? That's
if you look back 100 years, what did people 100 years ago really want, and how did they determine wealth? You had
a horse and buggy.
No, you had a big nice house. Cars were just coming around, so you had a car and you had fancy clothes. Those are still the same things that I think Americans and millennials value in terms of what makes you rich, or the things that they want.
Yeah, but I want to say that the level of advertising has gone crazy. A couple of years ago, I started going to this pizza joint for dinner with my husband once a week. The ads chase you into the bathroom. I mean, there are ads when you close the bathroom door. There's an ad there. I grew up in Manhattan. You look at pictures of Times Square in 1970 and what it looks like now. There are 10 million times as many ads in Times Square, which always had tons of advertising, as there was 45 years ago. The whole world, it's disgusting. It's crammed with advertising.
There's advertising. Then there's also, going back to your point about the times we live in, what was the big political message of the election? The life of Julia. And so we can depend on Social Security. We can depend on federal programs to get us, to loan us small businesses. We can depend on Medicaid. We can depend on Medicare. And so I think we're sending a message that people don't need to be responsible for their own lives. And that, to me, is a very scary thing.
So wait, that's interesting. But Patricia raised a fascinating point about, pushing a button, getting whatever you want, from directions to buying a product to whatever. Which do you think is a bigger influence, the one you just raised or that?
I'm a libertarian. Of course, I think the government's a bigger problem.
Yeah, but I would argue, I don't know many people who go, you know what I want? I want to be on welfare for the rest of my life and rely on other people. I think it is very much a generation of like self-empowerment, go out and make it happen. And what they're running into is this, which I've even heard rates of up to 24% of young people without jobs. And that's a real problem.
It's a bad combination of very easy access to absolutely everything, from information to material things, and very hard to find a job in order to make the money in order to get those things, so you're getting them from.
But no more are fairy tales these days. I mean, it's a Zuckerberg, it's Google, it's these kids who are 30 who can wear hoodies and have made billions of dollars by the time they're 30. And so there is an expectation that I don't have to put in a lot of work and I can get an enormous payday. And
all right.
I've had terrible interns. Ugh.
We are out of time, and thank you, Marjorie Clifton, for joining this portion of the show. Behind the Headlines, Sex and the Citadel is the title of journalist Shereen El Feki's controversial new book. In it, she explores the complicated relationship among sexuality, Islam, and Arab culture.
The Citadel that I speak of in the title and throughout the book is the fact that the only socially accepted context for sexual activity in the Arab world is marriage. And it's not any old marriage. It has to be approved by your family, it has to be religiously approved, and it has to be registered by the state. Anything else out of that citadel, this impregnable fortress, is forbidden or shameful. There's this endless lexicon.
Shereen El Feki says while governments are in part responsible for repressive attitudes towards women, more often societal convention is the culprit in limiting Islamic women's rights.
The important thing to keep in mind is that it's not just law which controls women's sexuality. There's also patriarchal attitudes which are ingrained in people's thinking. And if I can give you one example of this, female genital mutilation, FGM, is a very common practice in Egypt. About 80% of 15 to 17-year-old girls have been circumcised. And what's interesting about FGM is that it's women who make the decision to circumcise girls. It's mothers and grandmothers.
These attitudes have led many Arab women to feel dissatisfied with their marriages.
What I found amongst wives in particular, who were very open in talking to me about their sexual lives, is there was a real sense of longing. They wanted to have more equality within their marriages, in and outside of the bedroom. And these women very much wanted to articulate their sexual desires. But the problem is that they felt inhibited. They were afraid of how they would be judged. They were afraid that their husbands would say to them, "How do you know these things? Are you a bad woman? Do you have experience? Have you been outside the citadel?"
According to El Feki, Arab women do not necessarily want the exact same things Western women would want.
The unmarried women I met, most of whom did not want to have sex before marriage. They believed that it was against their faith. However, they certainly aspired to having more control over their own bodies, and they wanted to be able to make decisions for themselves, be it the ability to go out of the house, to move around freely, to be able to move into their own place.
While a New York Times book reviewer called her book full of, quote, ill-supported optimism, end quote, El Feki says she's confident that backward attitudes toward sex will be eased in the long term.
We have a lot of taboos around sex in the Arab region, and they are causing tremendous problems, whether they're inside marriage or outside marriage. What is interesting is that we are not helpless and we are not hopeless. There are people across the Arab region who are trying to challenge these taboos. And I think that that change is not a sideshow to the political and economic and social and cultural reform we're hoping to see in the decades to come. Finding this freedom and justice and dignity in the bedroom is going to be key to finding it outside as well. The personal and the political are intimate bedfellows anywhere in the world, and that includes the Arab region.
Welcome, Manal Omar. Do you agree with what she just said?
I think I do agree with what she said. I think that she's right in the sense that there is changes happening in the region. A lot of people would argue that it's changes going back to a liberal movement that happened, as far back as the 1800s. I mean, we have to remember when we're talking about Arab society, it's a very old, ancient civilization that has had peaks and valleys.
Well, what about, since the Arab Spring, a lot of women, feminists, what have you, in the Western world are afraid. They're watching what's happening in Egypt and what's happening, as women who came out and were at the barricades and protesting, and now they're being repressed. Mm-hmm. How does what she's talking about fit into all this?
I think that what you're seeing is a conversation between what was happening publicly, and particularly with the Arab Revolution, where women all across, you saw in Egypt, you saw in Libya. I remember a Libyan politician told me that women shamed them. They weren't planning on taking action, but when they saw women, they decided we have to do something. And to Yemen, where women really played a role in the revolution. And yes, they're being pushed, but we've seen that globally, where the private and public lives of women are told, thank you for your role in World War II. Thank you. You stepped up for factories. Now go back home. So you're seeing that in the Arab Revolution and within the Spring movement. But what you're hearing loudly clear are women saying, no, we won't go back. And you know what? Not only do we want changes publicly, we want changes in our own private lives, and we're ready to talk about it. But what I think is particularly interesting, and it's different than the movements that you saw in the 60s, is they're saying we're going to talk about it within a religious framework, within tying to our own culture, and we don't think it's mutually exclusive. We actually think that our religion and our culture will empower us. And that has really changed the dynamics of the conversation compared to what you saw under Suzanne Mubarak or in some of the earlier Arab feminist movements.
Now, what is it that Arab women want that's different from what Western women want? Do they want not quite as much freedom? I'm sorry to interpret it that way, but when I read about what they do want, I mean, they want to be able to cover their bodies more than Western women. They want to be what they see as sheltered by Islam. Whereas, Western women want total freedom regardless.
That's where the one point where I disagree with the author. I think that there's a lot of similarities and globally between what women want. I think it looks different. But what women want is the right to choose how they dress and, how much they expose and how little they expose. And women in the Arab world will say that. They'll say, whether it's a bikini or a burqa, we want the right to choose. Women want the right to define their own priorities. They're saying we don't want Western women or Arab men to tell us what our priorities. We kind of know we've got it covered. Just listen to us. And at the same time, when we do surveys, with the U.S. Institute of Peace and post-conflict, we're surprised that there are always three issues that women really, really focus on: health, security, and employment and education opportunities. And those tend to be, I think, again, what women globally are looking for. It may not look the same, but the actual underlying objective is the same.
Well, what I liked about this conversation is that I think you need to put sexuality on the table if you want to liberate women in the Muslim world from being perceived just as sexual objects. And the perception that we have in the West too often is that they're repressed because they're being seen only as sexual objects. And there are many more things. They're intellectuals, they're professionals, they're whole human beings. And until they're seen as a whole, it's going to be difficult to have a political opening.
I thought it was interesting when you pointed out that you don't want Western women as well as Arab men telling you what to do, because obviously there's been the controversy over Femen and the Ukrainian women and all these European protesters, and that's not necessarily helping the debate because it's actually doing the same thing. It's still imposing some kind of imperialistic top-down model for someone who should be able to determine their own path.
For sure. I think that's one of the greatest challenges. And I think women feel frustrated in the region. For example, when women in Afghanistan weren't allowed access to education. I mean, there was a real outcry, especially because the excuse was Islam. Yet at the same time, when women weren't being allowed access to education in France, there was no comments from the feminists. No one was saying anything. And at the end of the day, we're talking about access to education. Who cares how much or how little you're having to wear to get the access? And I think that's where women, particularly in the Arab world, began to feel betrayed by Western feminist movement. Is stand with us, don't stand against us, and let us define what we want.
Now, let me ask you one final question. We don't have much time left, but why do you choose in the Western world to wear a headscarf?
It's very interesting, my personal story. I wore the headscarf, and actually my mom comes from a very secular background, so she didn't speak to me for 6 months. She thought I was closing the door on women's rights when I chose. But I came at from a feminist angle, and you were talking about advertisement. I grew up in South Carolina in Spartanburg, and I remember every advertisement coming out really glorified women. It objectified women, and I wanted to fight it. So I actually came at hijab through very much a feminist perspective, saying I don't want my body or my hair or my looks to be used to sell products. And I felt this was a good way of protecting my femininity, valuing it, but not allowing it to be sold.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much for that answer, because frequently I see women in this area wearing it, and I think you're free now. You don't have to do that anymore. But that's a great explanation. That's it for this edition of To the Contrary. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Urbay or at To the Contrary, and visit our website, pbs.org/To the Contrary, where the discussion continues. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, please join us next time.